Every civilization that has ever existed told a story about how the world began, and every single one of them also told a story about how it ends. But here is where something strange emerges, something most people never notice when they hear about Ragnarok or the Book of Revelation or the Aztec Fifth Sunday. Some of these civilizations believe the end happens once, permanently, and everything is settled forever. Others believed it has already happened 4 times and will happen again and again without limit. Some believed the end is a judgment. Others believed it is simply a season. And this difference, whether a civilization imagined time as a straight line moving toward a final destination, or as a wheel turning endlessly through destruction and renewal, is not a minor variation in mythological detail. It is the single most revealing thing a culture can tell you about itself. Because how you imagine the end of the world determines whether you believe your life is a chapter in a story going somewhere or a moment in a cycle that has no destination at all. And when you lay these apocalypses side by side, Norse, Hindu, Aztec, Zoroastrian, Abrahamic, Maya, Buddhist, Hopi, what you find is not one human answer to the question of how it all ends. You find two fundamentally incompatible ways of understanding time itself. Begin in Scandinavia with the most famous apocalypse in the ancient world and one of the strangest. Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, described in the Poetic Edda and Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda, is remarkable not because the world ends, but because of who dies in it. The gods themselves are destroyed. Odin, the Allfather, chief of the Aesir, wisest of all beings, is swallowed by the wolf Fenrir. Thor kills the world serpent Jormungandr, and then staggers 9 paces before falling dead from its venom. The fire giant Surtur sets the 9 worlds ablaze. The sun is devoured, the stars fall from the sky, the earth sinks into the sea. What makes this cosmologically extraordinary is that the Norse gods know this is coming. They have always known. Odin has consulted the seeress, has hung himself on Yggdrasil to gain wisdom, has sacrificed an eye for a single drink from Mimir's well, and everything he learns tells him the same thing. He will die, his sons will die, everything he has built will burn, and there is nothing he can do to prevent it. The Norns, the 3 weavers of fate who sit at the roots of the world tree, spin destinies that even Odin cannot unravel. And yet, the gods prepare anyway. Odin gathers the Einherjar, the honored dead warriors of Valhalla, feeding and training them for centuries in preparation for a battle he already knows he will lose. This is a civilization's entire ethical philosophy compressed into a single mythological structure. You will lose, and you fight anyway, and the fighting is what gives the losing its meaning. The Norse lived in a landscape of brutal winters, treacherous seas, and short growing seasons, in a society where death in battle was common and survival was never guaranteed. Their apocalypse reflects that reality with brutal honesty. It does not promise that the good will be rewarded or that the faithful will be spared. It promises only that the end is certain, that even the gods are subject to it, and that how you conduct yourself in the face of certain defeat is the only thing genuinely within your control. And crucially, this is the detail most retellings omit. Ragnarok is not the true end. After the fire and the flood, a new earth rises from the sea, green and fertile. 2 humans, Leif and Leifthrasir, emerge from where they had hidden inside the world tree. Balder returns from the dead. Some of the younger gods survive. The world begins again. Ragnarok is not a full stop. It is a violent, total, necessary clearing of the ground. Travel east to India, and the concept of an ending dissolves almost entirely into something far vaster and stranger. Hindu cosmology operates on timescales that dwarf every other ancient tradition by orders of magnitude. The universe moves through 4 ages, or yugas: Satya, Treta, Dvapara, and Kali, each shorter and more morally degraded than the last. We are currently understood to be in the Kali Yuga, the final and darkest age, characterized by the decline of dharma, the shortening of human life, the erosion of truth and virtue. But the Kali Yuga alone is calculated at 432,000 years, and the full cycle of 4 yugas totals 4.32 million. 1,000 such cycles constitute a single kalpa, one day in the life of Brahma, lasting 4.32 billion years, at the end of which the universe dissolves in fire and flood, only to be recreated at the dawn of Brahma's next day. And Brahma himself lives for 100 such years before he too dissolves, a time span exceeding 311 trillion years, after which a new Brahma emerges and the entire process begins again, without beginning and without end. What is philosophically staggering about this system is that it contains no genuine apocalypse at all. There is destruction, endlessly, but no final destruction. There is no last judgment, no permanent settling of accounts, no moment when history's meaning is revealed and fixed. The end of the world is simply what happens between worlds, the way night happens between days. This produces a radically different relationship to individual human existence. In a linear cosmology, your life occupies a unique, unrepeatable position in a story, moving toward a conclusion which grants it enormous weight, but also enormous pressure. In the Hindu cyclical cosmology, your life is one moment among literally uncountable moments, in a universe that has already been created and destroyed more times than can be numbered. This can sound like nihilism to a Western ear, but within the tradition it functions as the opposite. It is precisely because worldly existence is endlessly repeating that the tradition directs attention away from history and toward liberation moksha, escape from the cycle entirely. If you cannot win history, because history has no end, then the only meaningful goal is to step off the wheel. The Aztec understanding of the end is perhaps the most operationally urgent of any civilization in this survey, because it turned cosmology into a daily obligation. According to the legend of the 5 suns, preserved in sources including the Codex Chimalpopoca, the current world is not the first, it is the 5th. 4 previous worlds, each governed by a different sun, have already been created and destroyed, the first devoured by jaguars, the second swept away by hurricanes, the third consumed by a rain of fire, the fourth drowned in a flood lasting 52 years. Each time, the sun died, the world ended, and the gods began again. We now live under the 5th sun, and it will end in earthquakes. This is not presented as distant prophecy. It is presented as an ongoing structural precariousness requiring constant management. The Aztecs believed the 5th sun had been created through divine sacrifice, the gods themselves throwing their bodies into fire at Teotihuacan to set the sun in motion, and that the sun, therefore, required continued nourishment to keep moving across the sky. This is the theological foundation for Aztec sacrificial practice, not sadism, not simple cruelty, but a cosmology in which the continued existence of the world was understood to depend on human participation in maintaining it. Every 52 years, at the completion of the calendar round, the Aztecs performed the new fire ceremony, extinguishing every fire in the empire, breaking household possessions, and waiting in darkness to see whether the stars would move correctly across the sky, whether the priests could kindle new fire, whether the world would be granted another 52 years. Consider what it means to live inside this cosmology. The end of the world is not a distant certainty to be philosophically contemplated. It is a recurring appointment, arriving every 52 years, which your civilization must actively pass. The Aztec apocalypse is the only one in this survey where human beings are not merely subject to the end, they are partially responsible for postponing it. In Persia, Zoroastrian tradition produced what may be the single most influential apocalyptic framework in human history, and one whose fingerprints appear across Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Frashokereti, usually translated as making wonderful or renovation, describes the final outcome of the cosmic struggle between Ahura Mazda, the source of truth and light, and Angra Mainyu, the source of the lie and destruction. Unlike the Norse, whose gods lose, and unlike the Hindus, for whom there is no final outcome at all, Zoroastrianism insists the struggle has a definite endpoint, that good definitively wins, and that history is therefore a directional process moving toward a specific resolution. At the end of time, a savior figure, called the Saoshyant, will appear. The dead will be resurrected, all of them, bodily. A river of molten metal will flow across the earth, and every soul will pass through it. For the righteous, it will feel like warm milk. For the wicked, it will burn away their impurity. But, and this is the detail that distinguishes Zoroastrianism from nearly every apocalyptic system that followed it, the purpose of the molten metal is not eternal punishment. It is purification. After passing through it, even the wicked are cleansed. Evil itself is annihilated, and all of creation, every single soul, is restored to perfection. This is universal salvation, articulated in Persia, possibly as early as the 2nd millennium BCE, and the structural elements are unmistakable in what came after. A final battle between cosmic good and evil, a savior figure, bodily resurrection, a final judgment, and a renewed and perfected world. Whether these elements passed into Second Temple Judaism during the Persian period, when Jewish communities lived under Achaemenid rule for 2 centuries, or developed in parallel, remains genuinely debated among scholars. What is not debated is that developed apocalyptic literature in the Jewish tradition appears after that period, and that the resemblance is close enough to demand explanation. The Abrahamic apocalypse, in its Christian form in the Book of Revelation and its Islamic form in the traditions surrounding Yawm al-Qiyamah, takes the linear structure to its fullest expression. Time has a beginning, a middle, and an absolute end. History is not a wheel, it is an arrow, released at creation and traveling toward a target. Revelation describes a sequence of catastrophes. 7 seals opened, 7 trumpets sounded, 7 bowls of wrath poured out, a final battle, the binding of Satan, the resurrection of the dead, judgment before a great white throne, and finally a new heaven and a new earth in which death itself is abolished. Islamic tradition describes major and minor signs preceding the hour: the appearance of the Dajjal, the return of Isa, the blowing of the trumpet by Israfil, universal resurrection, and the weighing of deeds on the scales of divine justice. What both share, and what distinguishes them fundamentally from Hindu or Aztec cosmology, is the conviction that history is going somewhere, that it means something as a totality, and that its meaning will be definitively revealed at its conclusion. This has enormous consequences for how a civilization understands itself. If history is directional, then progress is possible, moral effort accumulates, and the arc of events can bend toward justice. Nearly every Western concept of historical progress, including entirely secular ones, from Enlightenment theories of civilizational advancement to Marxist accounts of history moving toward a final resolution, inherits its underlying structure from this apocalyptic framework. The idea that history has a shape, a direction, and a destination is not a self-evident truth about time. It is a specific cultural inheritance, and its origins are apocalyptic. The Maya, by contrast, offer a case study in how badly a cyclical cosmology can be misunderstood by a linear one. In 2012, a global wave of anxiety surrounded the supposed Maya prediction that the world would end on December 21st of that year. It did not, and, more importantly, the Maya never said it would. What ended on that date was a Baktun, a period of roughly 394 years, and specifically the 13th Baktun of the current long count cycle. The long count is an elaborate positional calendar tracking days from a mythological starting point corresponding to 3114 BCE, and the completion of a great cycle was significant, ceremonially important, worth commemorating on monuments. But it was a calendrical rollover, not an ending closer to a car's odometer turning over than to the end of the world. Maya inscriptions reference dates far beyond 2012, including one at Palenque, referring to an event thousands of years in the future. The entire 2012 phenomenon is a demonstration of what happens when a culture organized around linear time, trained to expect a final apocalypse, encounters a calendar built by a culture organized around cycles. It reads the completion of a cycle as an ending, because in its own cosmological grammar, that is what completions mean. The Maya cosmos, like the Hindu one, did contain destruction. The Popol Vuh describes previous worlds destroyed by flood and by the failure of the gods' earlier attempts at humanity. But destruction in a cyclical system is a transition, not a termination. The Buddhist tradition, inheriting the vast Kalpic timescales of Indian cosmology, adds a distinctive element: the gradual degradation and eventual disappearance of the Dharma itself. In this framework, the Buddha's teaching does not endure forever. It passes through periods of true Dharma, semblance Dharma, and finally, the decline of Dharma, after which the teaching is lost entirely from the world. Then, after an immense interval, a new Buddha Maitreya will appear, rediscover the truth independently, and teach it again to a world that has entirely forgotten it. This is an apocalypse of forgetting rather than an apocalypse of fire. What ends is not the physical world, but the availability of the path out of suffering. And it, too, is cyclical: teaching, decline, loss, silence, and the eventual rediscovery of the same truth by a new teacher, endlessly. In North America, the Hopi tradition holds that we currently inhabit the fourth world, 3 previous worlds having already been destroyed by fire, by ice, and by flood, each time as a consequence of humanity's forgetting of the Creator's original instructions and the moral corruption that followed. The Hopi speak of a coming day of purification, when the fourth world will end and the fifth will begin, preceded by specific signs recorded in oral tradition and, according to Hopi elders, marked on a petroglyph site in Arizona known as Prophecy Rock. What is distinctive here, and what it shares with the Aztec system, is the sense of active, moral responsibility for the world's continuation. The previous worlds did not end arbitrarily. They ended because people stopped living according to the instructions they had been given, and the current world will end for the same reason. This makes the Hopi apocalypse simultaneously cyclical in structure and profoundly ethical in content. The wheel turns, but how and when it turns depends on what human beings do. It also carries an implicit hope that most linear apocalypses do not. Because a fifth world follows, the end is not a verdict on humanity as a whole. It is a reset, and those who have kept the instructions will carry them forward into what comes next, exactly as the survivors of the previous 3 worlds did. The Chinese tradition offers a striking counterexample to nearly everything discussed so far, because classical Chinese cosmology produced remarkably little in the way of a true apocalypse. There is no Ragnarok in the Confucian or Taoist canon, no final judgment, no cosmic battle deciding the fate of existence. What there is instead is the dynastic cycle, the idea, articulated in Chinese political philosophy from the Zhou period onward, that dynasties rise when they possess the mandate of heaven and fall when they lose it through corruption and misrule, after which a new dynasty receives the mandate and the cycle begins again. Natural disasters, famines, and rebellions were read as signs that the mandate was being withdrawn. This is an apocalyptic structure applied not to the cosmos but to political order. The world does not end, but worlds within it end constantly. And the pattern of collapse and renewal is the fundamental rhythm of history. Taoist thought reinforces this. In the Tao Te Ching and later Taoist writings, reality operates through the endless alternation of yin and yang, expansion and contraction, growth and decay, with no state permanent and no condition final. Buddhism, arriving in China from India, brought Kalpic cosmology with it, and Chinese Buddhist millenarian movements did periodically produce end times expectations, particularly around the coming of Maitreya. But the underlying Chinese instinct, visible across both Confucian and Taoist frameworks is that things do not end, they turn. Winter does not destroy the year, it completes it. So what does all of this tell us? Mircea Eliade, in his study of what he called the myth of the eternal return, argued that cyclical cosmologies serve a specific psychological function. They make history bearable. If time is a wheel, then no catastrophe is final, no suffering is ultimate, and every ending contains the seed of a renewal that is structurally guaranteed. The linear apocalypse offers something different and more demanding. It insists that history is real, that events matter permanently, that suffering is not simply absorbed into an endlessly repeating pattern, but accumulates toward a final accounting. Both are ways of making the terror of ending survivable. The cyclical answer says, this has happened before and will happen again, and the world always returns. The linear answer says, this happens once, it means something, and at the end, everything will be made clear. What is genuinely striking is that no civilization simply avoided the question. Every single one of them, having explained where the world came from, felt compelled to also explain where it is going, even those, like the Hindus, whose answer was essentially that it is not going anywhere in particular. And perhaps that compulsion is the most human thing in this entire survey. We are the animal that cannot tolerate an unfinished story. Given a beginning, we demand an ending. Given a world, we demand to know how long we have. And every one of these traditions, the gods who fight knowing they will lose, the wheel that turns without destination, the sun that requires blood to keep moving, the molten river that purifies rather than punishes, the arrow of history released toward a target we cannot yet see is a different answer to the same question, asked by people who knew, as we know, that everything they loved would eventually end, and who needed a story large enough to hold that knowledge without being crushed by it.